What is going on, everyone? This is Eric coming at you from just outside of Hartford, Connecticut. And today we're going to look at the 2021 NFL offseasons for all AFC North teams. Now, later in the day, we will release our NFC North offseason recaps. Yesterday we had the Easts, and then tomorrow will be the Souths, and then Friday will be the Wests. So definitely stay tuned. Anyway, we will start off by discussing the Baltimore Ravens. Now, the Ravens, they had a somewhat quiet offseason this year. They did draft 4 players in the top 3 rounds. The first, of course, would be wide receiver Rashad Bateman, who they drafted at 27. And then they drafted defensive end Odefe Owa at 31. We discussed both those guys in previous videos. Now, in the 3rd round, they had 2 picks. The first one was guard Ben Cleveland at 94. And then at 103, they selected cornerback Brandon Stevens. Just some good depth pieces for them. They did have a couple problems on the offensive line last year, so always a good idea to get a player there, and you can never have too many corners. Now, in the offseason, they did make some moves. So they re-signed running back Gus Edwards. That was a great move, especially now with their starting running back getting hurt for the year. So then they signed wide receiver Sammy Watkins, another guy who's very talented, but he can never seem to stay healthy. And then they made some moves on the offensive line, signing offensive tackle Jawan James, who will not play this year, but they signed him to a 2-year deal, so they'll get 1 year out of him. They also signed tackle Alejandro Villanueva. He's a solid player. He's very good. You got him from a division rival. He's not a superstar, but he's still very good. They also got guard Kevin Zeitler. Once more, he's formerly of a division rival, so can't go wrong with that, but he's nearing the end of his career. He does have some really glaring mistakes to fix. They re-signed defensive lineman Derek Wolfe, can't go wrong with that, along with linebacker Pernell McPhee. So these are 2 guys that they're not superstars anymore, but they're still good players. Now, they did lose some players as well this offseason. Namely, they lost quarterback Robert Griffin III. He was their backup. He did step in as a starter a game last year when Lamar had to miss the game due to certain protocols. They also lost running back Mark Ingram, wide receiver Des Bryant, and wide receiver Willie Snead. None of these guys were real huge names. Ingram, he was a good running back one in name, but in reality, he didn't get too many carries. Snead, solid player, never really broke out. Dez didn't do much of anything. They also lost offensive tackle Orlando Brown, whom they traded away. And then they lost a pair of defensive players who they will miss, in defensive end Yannick Ngakoue and linebacker Matt Judon. So both those guys, they will be missed. Ngakoue was more of a reserve player, like you'd have him coming off the bench. Sometimes he'd get good pressure, but he didn't have a great year last year. Judon will be missed. So next we have the Cincinnati Bengals, and they had a few picks in the top 3 rounds. The first one was, of course, wide receiver Jamar Chase, who they picked with the 5th pick. Still, people are confused why they picked him over Penei Sewell, who was available, the offensive tackle. We're not going to get into that. Then they had 2nd and 3rd. So with the 46th pick, they did address the offensive line when they picked offensive tackle Jackson Carman. And then at 69, they picked defensive end Joseph Osaya. Those are good players. You know, you got to build through the line, especially if you're a younger team. Cincinnati, they're in a rebuild. They need to get young assets. And it's never easy to get young, talented linemen. So, and then in the offseason, they did add some key players. So they did re-sign running back Samaje Perine. And then they did go out and they acquired a couple players for the offensive line and tackle Riley Reiff. And then they re-signed guard Quentin Spain. Hopefully, Reiff can help them fix their O-line. They want to keep Burrow healthy. And then they signed defensive end Trey Hendrickson. They paid him a lot of money, but he can be productive if he has a good year. They also got some help for their secondary, signing cornerback Eli Apple and cornerback Mike Hilton. Now, neither of these guys are probably going to be superstars, but they both will be starters for week 1. So, now they did lose a couple key players, namely, of course, running back Giovanni Bernard. He was a good backup running back for almost a decade at this point, I think 7 years. Wide receiver AJ Green was the face of this franchise for a while. He could be a Hall of Famer in the future if he can stay healthy, but the end of his career in Cincinnati was not good. They also lost another couple faces of their franchise in defensive end Carl Lawson, who had been around for a while, and of course defensive tackle Geno Atkins. Both those players, their impacts will definitely be missed, specifically Atkins. They also lost cornerback William Jackson III, as well as cornerback Mackenzie Alexander. Not great players to be losing, but still, this is a younger team. This is a rebuilding team. There's no point in giving them big contracts. So, then we have the Cleveland Browns, who were a bit of a surprise last year. So they did draft a couple players, and at 26th overall, they selected cornerback Greg Newsome II. He's a solid player. He should definitely be given some opportunity this year. They drafted linebacker Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, and Koramoah at 52 is solid value. He was expected to be an early second-round pick, according to some experts. They also grabbed wide receiver Anthony Schwartz at 91. Solid player. They don't necessarily need a receiver for 2021, but you can never have enough reserves, especially after seeing Odell get hurt last year. He's coming off a torn ACL. Now, in free agency, they didn't really get any offensive players, nor did they lose any offensive players, so that offense is going to be very similar to what it was last year. They mostly focused on the defense, so they did sign a pair of defensive ends in Jadeveon Clowney and Takaris McKinney. Clowney, of course, is the bigger name. He's going to slot in at defensive tackle for some plays this year. He made that comment about guards being easy to beat, so it's going to be interesting to see what happens. The guards are going to try to maul him. That might help out his teammates. They also got defensive tackle Malik Jackson, so clearly they saw that they need some help on the defensive line. They then signed linebacker Anthony Walker. He was one of the bigger names available this offseason. They also got a pair of secondary players from the Rams and cornerback Troy Hill and safety John Johnson. So these are guys that they'll be able to play basically anywhere in the secondary, specifically Johnson. So can't go wrong. They got them for cheaper, affordable deals. Now, they did lose some defensive linemen as well. They lost a pair of defensive ends in Adrian Claiborne and Olivier Vernon. Vernon, he didn't really work out for them. He was part of the Odell Beckham Jr. trade. Claiborne, not the player that they were hoping he would be. They also lost defensive tackle Sheldon Richardson. So they're hoping that the three players they acquired will do better than these three. Realistically, if Clowney can stay healthy, if Jackson can stay healthy, they will. Now, they did lose a pair of safeties as well in Carl Joseph and Andrew Sendejo. Neither one of these guys really was a key piece in their defense last year, so just worth mentioning in name. Lastly, we have the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, the Steelers, they had a little bit of an interesting offseason, so they did draft a few key players for their offense, specifically on the younger side. They got running back Najee Harris at 24. We discussed him previously. They also drafted tight end Pat Freiermuth at 55. Good value. It looks like the offense should definitely run through him to an extent. So you got to hope that he can stay healthy and, just play well. They also drafted center Kendrick Green at 87. Always good to have young linemen, especially since their starting center retired. We'll get to him in a minute. Now, they did add some key players as well in the offseason. They re-signed wide receiver Juju Smith-Schuster. He rejected longer-term, bigger contract deals from other teams because he wanted to spend one more year in Pittsburgh. He's hoping to have a good year this year with Big Ben. They also re-signed offensive tackle Zach Banner, and they signed guard Trey Turner. These are guys that hopefully will help them, keep Roethlisberger upright and help the run game improve. Then they re-signed defensive end Chris Wormley. He was formerly a Raven, so always good to have former division foes. They also re-signed defensive tackle Tyson Alualu. He's an older veteran, but he's been around that team for a while. They did sign defensive end Melvin Ingram, though, this offseason. He hasn't lived up to his status as a first-round pick, but he's still a decent pass rusher at times. And they signed cornerback Cameron Sutton. So, again, not the greatest acquisitions in the world, but still solid players to help a already strong defense. Now, they did lose running back James Conner, and tight end Vance McDonald did somewhat surprisingly retire after the season as well. They did allow offensive tackle Alejandro Villanueva to walk via free agency, and he unfortunately for them went to Baltimore, so that's a bit of a hit. They did surprisingly release guard David DeCastro. He's dealing with an injury, so that's never a good thing for them to release someone who's dealing with an injury. They also saw their starting center Marquise Pouncey retire after the season. That was very surprising. He and his brother both announced their retirement. Marquise was probably the bigger name of the two anyway, but, he's still a great player nonetheless. They did allow linebacker Bud Dupree to leave, as well as cornerbacks Steven Nelson and Mike Hilton. Nelson sat around in free agency for a while. Hilton, he went to a division rival. So, all in all, Pittsburgh should still be a decent team. Now, I'm going to do some quick little commentary for the teams here. Pittsburgh, they're going to rely on Roethlisberger. Can he stay healthy this year? Hopefully. Cleveland, they're just hoping that team can continue to succeed like they did last year. Cincinnati, you're still in a bit of a rebuild. You just want to keep Burrow standing. And Baltimore, you just got to hope that your team can stay healthy and overcome the injuries that you've already had to deal with. So, Here we have the 2020 standings. Pittsburgh won this division with a 12-4 record. They started off the year red hot, but then they did cool off at the absolute worst time. Baltimore and Cleveland both went 11-5. Baltimore had the head-to-head advantage over Cleveland, though. Cincinnati came in last with a 4-11-1 record. Their tie came against the Eagles. So, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see how they go this year. How do I have the standings looking? I have Cleveland winning this division, Baltimore coming in second, Pittsburgh coming in third, Cincinnati, unfortunately for them, staying in the basement. Cincinnati, young, talented team, but this division is so stacked, they're not going to be able to compete. Pittsburgh, I have them sliding in part because I don't necessarily trust that they're going to be able to figure out a lot of the problems that they have. Hopefully, Najee Harris helps them establish a run game more than James Conner did. Hopefully, having Freiermuth in the offense is a key plus. But they really are relying on Ben Roethlisberger staying healthy. It's that simple. Baltimore, they just had so many injuries, and they never really seem to succeed at the time when they need to. Of course, they did win a Super Bowl in the past decade, but they never seem to succeed at the right time. We'll have to see what they can do, but hopefully they can figure it out. I'd love to see Lamar get a championship. And Cleveland, I think that they're going to figure out their problems. I think that their offense basically staying the exact same. That's going to be good. This is a team that drove Kansas City to the brink. They almost beat Kansas City this last year in the playoffs. So it'll be nice. But anyway, this was the AFC North Division recap for the offseason. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Have a good rest of your day.